Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Joshino, and today I'm going to be breaking down and analysing the OB54 patch that's come out for Paladins on the public test server at the moment. It's going live on Wednesday and has quite a few big changes coming to the game. Now I've already talked about Lian, the new champion coming to the realm, and that won't be included, although you'll see some of her gameplay, against her in the gameplay in the background. So a big issue in the community, and has quite frankly been plaguing the game for quite a while, was the grinding system and the essence currency in particular, and the way that the grind required you to go buy radiant chests to randomly get cards, and it was just very fiddly and not good. What the devs have done is tried to address the situation, and there's some good things and bad things for different types of people. And I think there's going to be people that are happy and people that aren't so happy with these changes. There's quite a few things that they've done. So, card crafting, the actual cost of the cards on champions has been reduced. So, legendary cards have gone from 12,000 to 10,000 essence, epics have gone from 5,000 to 4,000 essence, uncommon has gone from 1,250 to 1,000 essence, and common has gone from 500 to 350 essence. Then daily login bonuses, so on day 4, instead of 350 gold, you'll get 250 essence, and on day 5, instead of 500 gold, you'll get 500 essence. And it also gives 1,000 essence on day 6 instead of 15 crystals, the part where some people aren't so happy because they enjoyed getting the little bits of the premium currency. They've also added some quests to the weekly quest rotation. Adventure awaits, giving 1,000 essence when you play 10 games. Champion, which now rewards 1,000 essence for winning 6 games. Together Indomitable gives 1,000 essence for winning 4 games in a party. These are all generally good in the grind for basically getting a loadout for a champion as fast as possible and being able to play them to their full potential. Now you don't need to unlock all cards for a champion, and there's certain builds that you'll find that work and they sort of synergize and are likely the best build for that champion, or there might be 1 or 2 depending on situations in the game. Dr. Yoshino, the patron saint of Paladins Reddit, did go through some of the chance percentages. The thing is, when you talk about the old system versus the new system, it's very hard to give any sort of precise analytics because we didn't know the drop rates completely on the chests, and it was a bit of a guess on what the grind would have been back then. But he estimated that it was about 13% quicker to get cards for a champion. One other thing that could help out with the grind is that they've made it so that there's less experience points required between levels 1 and 50. So there's about 35% less of a grind, 35% less experience between those levels, and each level you get a radiant chest as well, which could help especially newer players with getting ground out with loadouts. One thing I wonder whether they could add is a reset at say level 30, level 40 or level 50, somewhere in that region, so that if you have spent your essence incorrectly or on cards that you don't want anymore, you can basically load out the champions that you want with actual loadouts that maybe you found or put together, and have a reset so that you're not stuck in a place where you've bought things randomly that you're not actually using, and might help out as well with new players. That could be an option. The big downside of the grind for people that have been playing the game for a long time and people that are collecting is that they've increased the champion price from 7,500 gold to 12,500 gold for the most expensive ones, 5,000 to 7,500 gold for the middle tier ones, and the 4,000 to 5,000 golds for the lowest tier of champions to be purchased. What they've also done is increased the cost of common cosmetics in gold. I won't go through them all, but basically it's a bit of a hike. What they've done is lowered the crystal cost of all these common cards. They've also made it so that the radiant chest has a higher chance of dropping cosmetic items rather than the card. So the increased drop rate of cosmetics is 33%. Now I'm always going to stand in the place that I think that the radiant chest should just be cosmetics and the grind should be separate, because it just doesn't need to be random number generated. But for me, this is a step in the right direction, although I know quite a few people are upset that I'm not going to be able to grind out their cosmetic stuff. The only thing is, you've got to be realistic because hi-rez need to make money, and if they aren't going to make mega money on the grind, then they need to make it from the cosmetics, which is why a lot of free-to-play games don't give you any freemium currency at all, because they want you to purchase the cosmetics, or are very aggressive about it. And there are other cosmetics they're bringing out that are grind related, and hopefully the things like the competitive skins we've heard about will also help with filling that void of skins and things for players that are free players to try and go for. What I would say to every new player at the moment is if you do want to play all of the champions, you like the variety, buy the champions now. If you have the gold, or start stockpiling the gold before Wednesday, buy as many champions as you can, because obviously it will increase, but your grind will actually just change and you'll get that essence instead, and it won't really matter too much because you'll be able to get back into grinding out your loadouts. So if you do want to unlock the champions, now's the time to do it. And if you do actually want those common cards, then probably buy those with the premium currency, the gold, if you have it stockpiled around. But again, making the grind simpler, not so random and ridiculous, is a good thing, and that's a good step in the right direction. And I think for the game, for new players especially, this should help a lot. So last patch there was a bit of a sweeping change to a lot of projectile champions to have projectile speed addition. This time around, under the firing line is legendary cards. Specifically, they've tried to nerf a lot of the movement legendary cards. Now, a lot of people have been a bit angry about that too. There's a bit of two sides of the coin here as well. People that don't like the changes because they love the mobility in the game, and those that like it because they thought the mobility was too much. Personally, some of them are good, some of them aren't so good. The thing is, I played back when there weren't legendary cards at all, and the game was actually in a decent place. In some ways, even though the legendary cards added some customization, they made this whole balancing system a bit bonkers, and it is very difficult to basically balance 3 versions of a champion because it is throwing variables around a little bit. Anyway, the first big nerf is to Androxus Dark Stalker card. So this no longer gives you those connected dashes, which has been for a long time the staple of the Androxus build. I had a lot of fun with it, it was definitely a fun ability, but now the card deals 30% more damage to enemies below 40% health. It's kind of the opposite to Lex's pistol, which does it to people that have high health. As he is a flanker, finishing people off is a big deal, so I guess it does fit in with him being a flanker, although I'm not necessarily all that for the damage cards. I just think they're a bit bland. And that's actually a bit of a theme as we go through some of the cards now. They've just put damage cards in their place. Ash is next up, and her burst cannon has been changed to now automatically explode when in proximity of enemies you're firing at. Again, it does make it a little difficult to fire at people far away, but at least now you've got the best of both worlds. You can fire around a corner where an enemy's close to you and hit them, which was part of the meta when she wasn't changed, and you can now also still engage with people that are further away. So I think actually it's a pretty decent change this time around. And with Fortress Breaker, the card, it increases the size of Sea Shield by 50%, just making it more of an option to pick up, although I still think that the other two are quite fun to play with. Barrack's weapon card has been reworked to modify the blunderbuss to fire a single slug that deals 650 damage. So if you want to play a damaged Barrack, then this is the option for you. The next champion on the shopping block is Buck. So first of all, Bounce House has been reworked, so Heroic Leap now deals 450 damage and knocks enemies up within 35 feet of where you land. You no longer have the double Heroic Leap, just a massive movement nerf. Another nerf is to General Buck's kit, in that the Heroic Leap no longer deals damage on its normal. They've also changed the legendary card Ensnare. They've buffed it to give increased damage bonus from 40 to 60% when you have the net trap on somebody. Finally, the card Exhilarate has an increased hit radius of 25 to 35 with your Heroic Leap, which heals you if you hit enemies. So let's break down Buck. I don't know whether anybody thought Buck was overpowered in the past patch. I'm not sure if the movement was the problem here. Honestly, taking away the Heroic Leap damage from his normal is part of why I didn't like the legendary cards in the first place, because they took away from the default parts of a champion's kit that made them actually quite good. And I do wonder whether it's just because Buck is harder to deal with in earlier games when people don't pick up Cauterize, and maybe the Buck's able to just get away unscathed because they've got such big health ball, but the damage is pretty low. Even with this 450 damage and the knockup on the Bounce House, it doesn't really do a lot. You can still be bursted down, you can be stunned, people can get Cauterize to counter you. And the Ensnare, the increased damage bonus, again it's a damage bonus, it's not a very fun mechanic. And the net card isn't exactly the easiest thing to use. And it does give him a bit of burst potential as a flank, but honestly meh. Buck seems like he's been pushed out of the meta this time around. The next big movement nerf, and the one that I fundamentally don't like, is Bomb King. So Accelerant has been reworked. Instead of doing the extra knockback on yourself so you could go quite far, the Grumpy Bomb now explodes 50% faster, basically making the Grumpy Bomb more active and you can do the stuns much quicker. The other change is to his legendary Demolition, which is also a Grumpy Bomb legendary, which is part of the reason why it's not so great, because they're both Grumpy Bomb legendaries. But on Demolition it gets rid of the shields, but now also stuns people and damages through the shield. So if you destroy a Fernando's shield, he'll also be stunned, which is, I guess, a nice addition that makes Demolition more important. But fundamentally, and I think a lot of the movement changes are the fact that I like movement in the game. Movement is fun, and being able to move around the map as a Bomb King is just pure fun, going up into the air, bombing around. On hi-rez argument, they say people that move around are harder to hit. It makes most of the games in casual harder to play against because obviously they're harder to hit. You have to have good tracking, good aim, and good game sense to know where they're going to come from, so movement can have a big effect. But Bomb King was the one that was part of his kit, and then they removed it, and then he went out of the meta a bit, then they put it back again, and he came back as a legendary card, and he came back in. So the next movement, Guillotine, is to Drogo's Worm Jets, reducing the fly speed from 65% to 40%. So I don't play games where I go against the Worm Jets Drogos. I don't see that. I don't think it's necessarily that great, compared to the Combustible especially, and sometimes use a lot depending on what the enemy team composition is. If you're going against two flankers and you need to go balls to the wall. Worm Jets was never something that I worried about if I played against the Drogos, and here again, I don't know whether it's a movement nerf for movement nerf's sake. The next big one is to Eevee. Now, Teleport was a card that pretty much everybody picked up, and it used to increase your teleport from 25 to 100% at its max level. Now, between that 75% and that 100%, it allowed you to get onto a lot of ledges into the game, and just made that teleport just a little bit further, and it gave a lot of gameplay elements to Eevee to be able to dodge, dip, duck, and dive during the game. And then that's been taken away because it's gone from 25, 50, 75, 100 to 10, 20, 30, and 40%. And that 40% value isn't all too far. Again, Eevee before the projectile speed changes wasn't necessarily good or bad. She was picked up sometimes, she did okay, but she wasn't necessarily part of the main meta in competitive and in the esports scene. In my eyes, Eevee was the most maneuverable champion. She has a tiny health pool, but she makes up with it from being able to self-sustain and move around, but is very vulnerable to burst. And the changes that they've made have just frustrated her. The next one is Reprieve. They've reduced the healing from 600 health per second to 300 health per second. It was an annoying legendary card to go up against, and this is one where you go into Ice Block and heal, but now you're not fully healed as you come out of it, and it means that you'll definitely have to wait till the end of it. I just think that they've made this Reprieve not really the card you're going to pick up anymore, because it's just not as useful. Finally, Over the Moon, so this is the Saw card. Now, is reworked to deal 20% more damage for 3 seconds after Saw ends, so this is their take on previously you used to be able to teleport and then you do extra damage, and this is their rework for that to make Over the Moon more important, which does give Eevee a bit of burst, and we'll just have to see how that one works out. I haven't really played around with it. I'll cover the champion that's randomly got a movement buff, which is Ruckus in his Fuel Reserves card, and that is, it increases the distance of advance by 7, 14, 21 or 28%, which when you use with your Flight card can make you go a lot further. So this time around, Ruckus has been given some maneuverability. Ruckus Recycler has been reworked to instead now deal up to 30% more damage based on your missing health. It goes to around 70 damage when you're almost dead. I think the highest I capped out was 69, which I'm guessing is roughly there, per body shot. It doesn't count when you put your shield on, so it's only your health points which affect this card, which can mean that if you're low and you put your shield on and you're still firing at somebody, you're going to do that extra damage. I don't know how this one is going to work out, but again, it's another damage change. And I think a lot of the changes to tanks as we go through will highlight that they're bringing more damage to them. This is one option for Ruckus to do that. So, in the same vein, Torvald has had a change to his Direct Current, a legendary card. It used to make Runic Blast last longer by a second, but now instead just deals 500 damage in front of you. Personally, I think this is pretty meh compared to the card which gives extra damage to everybody you put your shields on, and what 1 second extra silence could have meant, because obviously it makes you more tanky. It means that your enemies can't do anything, they can't escape. So yeah, I'm not too sold on this legendary card. So there's not just a emphasis on the damage and the movement, but also on cooldown reduction. the biggest example of this is with Fernando. His fireball now has a reduced cooldown from 9 to 6 seconds, and projectile speed is increased from 140 to 180. I don't have to tell you how ridiculous this is. You've probably seen it a little bit in the gameplay. Basically, with cards and with Chronos, you can get it down to 1 second, well, I think it's actually 1.5 or something like that seconds, because it shows up as 1 second, but it's not actually. And basically, you just spam your fireball. Put that with his range increase and damage changes in the past few patches, Fernando is very formidable now, but he's extremely aggressive. He can almost fully commit now to the flank Nando role. I don't know whether they intended to have literally 1 second fireballs, but hey, that's what we've got. Although they did slightly counteract partly his fireball in that Hot Pursuit, the one where you get extra movement speed, has had its reduction go from 3 to 2 seconds, which means that it's going to be a little bit harder to chase people down after you fireballed them, but it sort of levels out because the range of your Flame Lance is further. I actually think that Fernando's definitely a pickup if you're picking up a tank this time around, and works well with another tank to both shield them sometimes, but then most of the time go off and flank Nando and take out the enemy damage dealers, because you're just going to be able to fireball them to death and chase them down. Inara 2's been in receipt of these reduction changes. The Tremor legendary card has been reworked so that the cooldown of Impasse is reduced by 80% as long as it isn't destroyed. The actual wall itself doesn't go. Now, I think the idea here is to try and make Bulldozer, the item in game, a bit more valuable, so that you have to take down Inara's walls, but in reality, people are still going to probably ignore it, and she's just going to have a wall all of the time. Although I would say that playing the games with the PTS, it doesn't seem to have that much of an effect on her, because obviously she doesn't have the power of Mother's Grace, which makes her a bit more viable. I think maybe in smaller maps like Jaguar Falls, where it's more tight, where the walls are more important, it might work better. Makara under the Tank Umbrella also got a tiny buff, getting crowd control immunity during Ancient Rage, so he can no longer be stunned anymore. I don't know whether they've just given him this after they've buffed all of the other tanks, the frontliners, but at the very least, it will make it, once again, that you don't want to challenge Makoa. So some other general changes. Cassie's Impulse, the legendary card, also now reduces the cooldown of Blast Shot by 2 seconds. I still don't really feel the value of the Blast Shot compared to the roll card because of the amount of damage you can do, so not entirely sold on that one. Also, they reworked Big Game, so after you hit an enemy with Disengage, all shots after that will deal additional 5% of the enemy's maximum health in damage for 6 seconds. This makes the card easier to use and is less forgiving if you miss the first shot, but still, unless you're against a 2-tank combo, and because the Disengage has a big cooldown, I'm not entirely sure that this is a great pickup compared to the just you get extra damage every time you roll card, which you can reset the roll with. On Lex, they've changed the Discovery card to deal 20% more damage to your Retribution target and reduce the cooldown of Retribution by 15 seconds, which halves the time of getting a new Retribution target, and pretty much means that you'll get somebody that you more likely want with the Retribution, and might actually be a pickup this time round over the Death Hastens card, which is the extra damage. Maeve is the movement card I missed. I completely forgot about it because Cat Burglar wasn't really that good. It didn't do a lot for you because jumping the 3rd time in the air just kept you in the air a bit longer, but didn't really propel you forwards like the other movement abilities do. I don't think it was a very good card generally, but they've reworked it. Again, this might be because it wasn't picked up, perhaps. But now instead it deals 30% more damage with your first shots after Prowl. Again, another damage and a little bit of burst for Maeve. I do see where they're going with this because Maeve is really struggling at the moment, and giving her a bit of... We'll try and nudge her in the flank roll and being better, but we'll just have to see how that one plays out. I've played a few Maeves in the PTS and haven't really had any problems with them, so I'm not sure that it's working all too well. Another reset change is to Charlene with Shifting Sands. So the card's been reworked. It used to be the lifesteal in your ultimate. Now it resets the cooldown of Planted when you kill an enemy. I've showed it off in a video if you want to check it out. It's kind of crazy to get back like Planted over and over again every time you get a kill, but I don't necessarily think it's competitively great because you do actually need to get the final kill, and Planter's not necessarily the most important thing in your kit. The other thing they changed is Desert Shadow, so it gives 3 seconds in your withdraw invisibility, and also gives you 30% damage if you fire during the time when you're invisible, so you break the stealth. Withdraw does have a pretty hefty cooldown, so I'm not sure how much impact this has on the game compared to Recurve, and also invisibility has a varying effect, but it is better with Charlene because you move, then go invisible, unlike Skyway, you just go invisible on the spot and people can chase you down. Next up is Tyra. The firebomb can now deal damage to deployables, which is just a nice little change. Basically, it's an area denier on the point just for everything, so if a barrack sets up, then everything is going to go. Then they've also changed the Hunting Party legendary card to increase damage for allies on your Hunter's Mark from 15% to 25%. This is actually a card that could be good in more competitive games because you will be singling out targets and going after one target at a time, and also taking down tanks. It could definitely be an option coming up with Tyra and more of a team play option. Sarah's also had a buff in her soul orbs. Basically the size and the hitbox of the projectiles has been increased, so the remote proximity distance, they call it, has gone from 2.5 to 3. Before the size was nerfed to 2.5, it was at 4, so it's just slightly bigger. The next buff is to Maldamba. Spirits Chosen now applies whether or not you already have Mending Spirits on your target. So that means you don't have to hit somebody twice with a heal, it'll always give that 300 extra health points. This actually does make it a more enticing pickup in the loadouts because you're going to be doing much more healing with this card. You can do it on several targets as well, not just the one. Wikono's Wrath, which used to be the ultimate legendary, has been reworked to make the snakes to deal 700 damage, so 200 plus a 500. So if you want to be an aggressive Maldamba, then this could be your pickup, although I'm not sure that in the majority of games where you need an active healer, whether this will be picked up, but have we seen with Grover, which I'm just about to talk about, maybe having 2 healers in a game and both acting semi-damage, semi-heal might work out, maybe. We'll just have to see on that one. Onto Grover's Ferocity. This changes the damage scaling of his axes from 30 to 60%. Now, I've tried to test this out on the public test server to see how much of a difference this makes. And in the shooting range, it seems to be completely and utterly broken. It only goes up to a maximum of 1000 damage, and both having Ferocity and not having Ferocity just don't seem to matter at all. I then tried it in some bot matches to see in the training games to see if I could work out the ranges. It does seem to scale up the damage quite a bit. In the same range, you might get 200 or more damage in shooting from the same range. Like I was firing from, if you imagine the platform in Primal Court, down to the enemy spawn room, and in one instance I did 500 and something damage without the Frosty, and then around 700 damage with it. Honestly, I don't think this will replace Deep Roots, just because having that lockdown is so important, and it's just like Makoa's Hook. It's one of the big players that can change the game up. And Grover's gotten better generally because he has this extra damage, but he has that sustainable damage in his projectile speed now anyway, and with that Deep Roots you get several shots off whilst they're rooted, and it allows your allies to shoot them as well. Pip has had a nerf, and that is to his acrobatics, which used to make you jump much higher, is now basically weightless, removes crowd control and makes you immune to crowd control effects. Again, this is one of the mobility nerfs. The thing is, one of the hi-rez executives posted on Twitter saying that acrobatics was actually one of the most highly performing legendary cards. I just can't see how that works out. There's quite a few problems because Pip hasn't really been in the meta in a lot of the higher skill games, or he's picked as like a support for his ultimate and all the CC that he does, and then extra healing as well for your team. And the acrobatics of flanking Pip, I don't see a lot. I don't see a lot in the esports scene that much, and even in casual matches I'm not sure where this was really going wrong or where it was overpowered. I don't know whether it's a bit of a bad sample size because so many Pips are bad because it's the default pickup, the default healer for new players, so they're going to be playing with the default legendary card, which probably drags down the statistics. So I wouldn't be surprised, but people that play with acrobatics have maybe broken out of the normal default cards and are more experienced than those people that use the Mega Potion, even though the Mega Potion is maybe better if you're going for that healing role. So I'm really unsure about that one. Anyway, that was all the changes to the champions. Something worth clarifying is they have not nerfed the base ability of the champions. They may have not communicated that very clearly on the dev preview. The movement legendary cards are what are being nerfed, and I don't think necessarily they were what made or break the game. I liked Paladin's movement before it went with the legendary cards, although I do think that a lot of the legendary cards are very fun, so bear that in mind as I go through my conclusions, apart from Bomb King, which I just feel it takes too much away from him, and how he played was extremely fun. He was on my list of most fun champions to play quite a while ago too. There are some things that I really wonder about these changes and the motivations behind them. I think hi-rez is a bit troubled about what's happened since they introduced the legendary cards. I think they've come to a point where they're struggling to balance for them, and especially between console and PC, where console players find it really hard to track enemies whilst they're moving fast if they're not playing a hit scan champion because of the way auto aim works, and just generally the aim on the controller is worse than the controls on a mouse which is powered by a laser. The game wasn't terrible before the legendary cards came out. They've obviously brought out some fun elements to the game and some customizations, but all of the changes that they seem to bring in these little bits of extra damage, and they maybe even have 2 damage types of legendary cards on each champion now, and it does seem a little bit bland in its implementation and almost not really having much of an impact. I've got a question for you all. What do you think about the legendary cards? Do you think they still have a place? Would you like them to be more crazy and to be what they were, or do you think it's okay to have something that adds a little layer of change and spice for each of the champions that currently seems to be shifted back to? In some ways I wonder whether they could take the legendary cards, rework them into the champions, some of the best parts, and maybe go vanilla again, because it could be an option. Be sure to let me know in the comments section below. The other change is there's a test map in the Q rotation called Tilted, and it's an onslaught map, and it's the first map, or the first map I believe for quite a while, that's had a lift in it, so you can actually use a usable lift to get up at the top of a room. It also kicks you out of the spawn rooms, which is pretty cool, because there's been some ridiculous times of a Kinessa camping the spawn room in Primal Court, and you can't really kill her because you can just teleport back into the spawn room. It's just an annoying little point. On the skins, I might cover these a bit later if I get a giveaway to give some of these skins away, but there's actually a new winter type chest. It's called the Festive Chest. Oddly back, but actually it's less of a winter chest and more of a Game of Thrones chest. There's lots of little hints towards Game of Thrones. Like Tyra has a direwolf skin with like a direwolf cape that she's wearing, like the skin of a wolf. And there's voice packs on both her and the Inara one, which have lots of references to the Wall and the Watch, which is obviously like the Night's Watch in Game of Thrones. It's pretty cool. The weapon itself as well is like a wolf's head. And Inara's is this sort of ice witch sort of thing. It almost reminds you a bit of the ice witch in Lion Witch in the Wardrobe. And they're both pretty cool, to be honest. One general gameplay thing they've changed is in Onslaught, teams will now gain additional respawn time based on how far ahead in tickets they are. It's actually quite noticeable if you're winning and the enemy team, and you die and the enemy team will be coming back all the time. It's not necessarily a bad thing, because if there's a really good player on your team, the enemy team keep on spawning, you can keep on killing more people, because there's more people up for you to kill. So it's got 2 edges of the sword. I think I need more time to play this to see how it works out. I do play Onslaught as a bit of a casual side, and maybe for practice as well before I actually play. Anyway, that was a patch. There was quite a lot to talk about, so it's a bit longer than usual. What does everybody else think about everything I've talked about? I've hopefully broken it down quite a bit. I do think the essence stuff is a step in the right direction. I think the balancing, I'm not too sure about. I don't necessarily think it's bad, but I wonder where they're going with it. And the skins, they're nice. They're quite good this time around, although maybe don't fit in with the season. And anyway, thank you all very much for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more of my content, and I'll see you all next time. Joshino.